The insistent buzz of her phone, a jarring intrusion at dawn, was almost as unwelcome as the news it carried. "No," Ava whispered into the receiver, her voice a raw rasp, the single syllable a futile attempt to push back the tide of impending disaster. "She can't be." Not now, her mother's familiar cough, now amplified by the sterile silence of the hospital waiting room, echoed in Ava's memory, a grim counterpoint to the doctor's grave pronouncements. The world outside, usually a vibrant tapestry of city sounds, seemed muted, a mere backdrop to the sudden, stark reality of her mother's illness. This was not a request, it was an ultimatum, delivered with the cold, unyielding finality of fate. The opulent mansion, shrouded in the pre-dawn mist, loomed before her, a silent, imposing beast of glass and stone. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress, a gilded cage for secrets and power. Her mother, the sole provider, the steady anchor in Ava's turbulent life, was now incapacitated, leaving Ava adrift, scrambling to pick up the fractured pieces of their existence. The Maid uniform, a crisp, dark blue with a starched white apron, felt like a costume, an ill-fitting disguise for the fear coiling in her gut. She was a scholar, a dreamer, not a domestic servant, and certainly not a replacement for her mother in the house of a man whose name was whispered in hushed, fearful tones. Every step up the polished marble driveway felt like a descent, a surrender to a life she never envisioned. The air, thick with the scent of expensive lilies and an underlying metallic tang she couldn't quite place, pressed down on her, an invisible weight. Her fingers, usually nimble with textbooks, trembled as she rang the bell, the chime echoing through the vast emptiness of the foyer, a stark contrast to the cacophony of her own racing heart. A stern-faced butler, Mr. Alaric, opened the door, his gaze sweeping over her, an unspoken judgment in his cold, gray eyes. "You're late," he stated, his voice a low rumble, devoid of warmth. "Mr. Kim doesn't tolerate tardiness." The words were a whip, stinging her already frayed nerves. "My mother, she's ill. I'm her daughter, Ava. I'm here to take her place," Ava managed, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the defiance simmering beneath. She clutched the worn strap of her bag, her knuckles white. This was not just about money. It was about survival, about holding on to the last vestiges of their fractured family. The opulent decor, a dizzying display of gold leaf and antique furnishings, seemed to mock her humble attire, a stark reminder of the chasm between their worlds. The silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken expectations, with the weight of a world she was utterly unprepared for. The scent of danger, subtle yet pervasive, clung to the very air, a silent warning. The first week was a blur of polished surfaces and hushed instructions. Ava moved through the sprawling mansion like a ghost, her presence barely acknowledged by the few staff members who flitted through the gilded halls. Her hands, accustomed to the delicate turning of book pages, ached from scrubbing floors and polishing ancient silver. Each task, no matter how menial, was a stark reminder of her mother's silent sacrifices, of the invisible labor that had kept them afloat. The sheer scale of the place was overwhelming, a labyrinth of rooms, each more lavish than the last, filled with artifacts that looked like they belonged in a museum. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was surrounded by priceless treasures, yet her own pockets were empty, her future uncertain. Mr. Kim, the elusive owner, remained a phantom presence. She saw his shadow occasionally, a fleeting glimpse of a dark suit disappearing around a corner, heard the low murmur of his voice through closed doors, but never encountered him directly. He was a myth, a legend, a name that evoked both fear and respect in equal measure. The other maids, a small, tight-lipped group, offered little solace. Their faces were etched with a weariness that Ava recognized, a silent testament to the demanding nature of their work and the oppressive atmosphere of the house. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversations peppered with warnings and unspoken anxieties. "Don't look him in the eye," one whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't ask questions. Ava absorbed it all, a sponge soaking up the unspoken rules of this strange, dangerous new world. The kitchen, a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and marble, became her sanctuary, a place where she could momentarily escape the suffocating silence of the upper floors. She found solace in the methodical rhythm of cleaning, in the simple satisfaction of transforming chaos into order. But even there, the tension was palpable, a constant hum beneath the surface. The maid's uniform, once a symbol of her mother's quiet dignity, now felt like a uniform of subservience, a constant reminder of her own diminished status. She missed her books, her studies, the intellectual pursuits that had always defined her. Now her days were filled with the mundane, the physical, the demanding. Yet, beneath the surface of her exhaustion, a quiet defiance began to stir. This wasn't her life, not truly. She was here out of necessity, a temporary placeholder, and she refused to let this place, or its intimidating owner, strip her of her spirit. She would endure, she would learn, and she would find a way back to herself. The thought, a tiny spark of rebellion, flickered in the oppressive gloom, a nascent promise of something more. The air in the grand dining room was thick with the scent of roasted lamb and an unspoken tension. Ava, meticulously placing a crystal water glass, felt a prickle on the back of her neck. She knew he was there, even before she saw him. Mr. Kim. He was seated at the head of the impossibly long table, a solitary figure in a perfectly tailored dark suit. His presence was a physical force, a gravitational pull that seemed to absorb all light and sound. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his late 30s, his features sharp, almost chiseled from stone. His eyes, dark and intense, were fixed on her, an unsettling, unwavering gaze that seemed to pierce right through her. Ava's breath hitched. "You're the new maid," he stated, his voice a low, resonant rumble, a surprising contrast to the almost predatory stillness of his body. It wasn't a question, but a declaration, an assessment. "Ava," she managed, her voice a little too high, a little too shaky. She hated the way her knees wanted to buckle, the way her carefully constructed composure threatened to shatter under his scrutiny. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "I understand you're replacing your mother." His tone was devoid of emotion, a flat statement of fact, yet it carried an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite decipher. Pity? Curiosity? Disapproval? She didn't know. "Yes, sir. She's unwell." The words felt inadequate, a pathetic excuse for her intrusion into his perfectly ordered world. He picked up a silver fork, turning it slowly in his fingers, the polished metal glinting in the soft chandelier light. "I prefer punctuality and discretion above all else, Miss Ava. Do you understand?" The question was a challenge, a subtle threat veiled in politeness. "Yes, sir," she replied, her chin lifting almost imperceptibly. She met his gaze for a fleeting moment, a spark of defiance flashing in her eyes before she quickly lowered them. She wouldn't cower, not entirely. He observed her, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. "Good. Now you may serve." The command was abrupt, a dismissal, and Ava felt a flush creep up her neck. She moved with practiced efficiency, pouring water, serving the untouched dishes, her hands steady despite the tremor in her stomach. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware and the occasional rustle of his suit. He ate sparingly, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being observed, analyzed, every gesture scrutinized. It was like being on stage, performing for a solitary, demanding critic. When he finally pushed his plate away, the meal barely touched, Ava felt a wave of relief. "You may clear," he said, his voice flat. As she gathered the dishes, her hand brushed against the crisp linen tablecloth. He was watching her again, his eyes lingering on her hands, then on her face. "Your mother was an excellent maid. Dependable. Quiet." The words were a backhanded compliment, a reminder of her mother's perceived superiority, and a veiled warning. Ava paused, her back to him. My mother is an excellent woman, Mr. Kim, she said, her voice low but firm. And she taught me well. She didn't wait for his response, simply continued clearing the table, a silent act of defiance. The air crackled with an unspoken challenge, a subtle power play between the maid and the master. He remained silent, a statue of dark intent, but Ava felt the weight of his gaze until she finally exited the dining room, the heavy doors closing behind her, sealing her off from his enigmatic presence. The encounter had left her rattled, but also, surprisingly, invigorated. She had stood her ground, however subtly, and a tiny sliver of courage had taken root. Days bled into weeks, each one a grueling cycle of labor and silent observation. Ava learned the rhythms of the house, the unspoken rules, the subtle shifts in Mr. Kim's moods. She noticed the way he always left a single, untouched rose in a vase on his desk, the way he lingered by the antique globe in the library, his fingers tracing forgotten coastlines. These small details, incongruous with the ruthless image he projected, began to chip away at the monolithic facade she had built around him. One stormy evening, a sudden power surge plunged the mansion into darkness. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Ava. She fumbled for her phone, its flashlight beam a weak defense against the encroaching gloom. A crash from the library made her jump, her heart hammering against her ribs. She hesitated, fear warring with a strange sense of responsibility. This was his house, his world, and she was, for now, a part of it. Taking a deep breath, she moved towards the sound, her footsteps echoing eerily in the sudden silence. The beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating Mr. Kim standing amidst shattered glass and scattered books. A heavy, ornate picture frame lay broken at his feet, its contents, a faded photograph of a young woman with a gentle smile, exposed. His face, usually a mask of stoicism, was etched with a raw, almost childlike pain. He looked utterly vulnerable, a stark contrast to the formidable man she knew. Ava froze, an intruder in a moment of profound, private grief. "Mr. Kim?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind outside. He looked up, his dark eyes wide, startled, like a cornered animal. For a fleeting second, she saw not the feared Mafia boss, but a wounded soul, a man haunted by ghosts. His usual composure was shattered, replaced by a vulnerability that was both shocking and deeply unsettling. He quickly composed himself, his jaw clenching, the mask falling back into place. "It's nothing," he said, his voice rough, devoid of its usual steady cadence. "A mere accident," but the tremor in his hands, the lingering shadow in his eyes, betrayed his words. Ava knelt, her flashlight illuminating the shattered frame, the delicate features of the woman in the photograph. "Let me help you," she offered, her voice soft and pathetic. She began to carefully gather the broken glass, her movements gentle, respectful of his fragile moment. He watched her, his gaze intense, unreadable. The storm raged outside, mirroring the quiet turmoil within the room, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected intimacy that had blossomed in the darkness. The next morning, the shattered frame and photograph were gone, replaced by an unsettling normalcy. Mr. Kim was back to his usual reserved self, his face a carefully constructed mask. Yet something had shifted between them, a silent understanding, a fragile bridge built in the darkness. Ava found herself observing him with new eyes, no longer just a formidable boss, but a man burdened by an unseen past. She noticed the way he sometimes paused, his gaze distant, as if lost in thought, the way a fleeting shadow would cross his face when certain melodies played on the radio. One afternoon, while dusting in his study, Ava noticed a small, intricately carved wooden box tucked away on a shelf. Her mother had always warned her against touching Mr. Kim's personal belongings, but a strange compulsion drew her in. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She lifted the lid, revealing a collection of delicate, pressed flowers, each one perfectly preserved, their colors still vibrant despite the passage of time. And beneath them, a small, worn leather-bound journal. The pages were filled with elegant, flowing script in Korean. She couldn't read the words, but she could feel the weight of them, the raw emotion emanating from the aged paper. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of jasmine wafted from the box, a ghost of a memory. A sudden creak of the floorboards behind her sent a jolt of fear through Ava. She slammed the box shut, her hand flying to her chest. Mr. Kim stood in the doorway, his eyes, dark and piercing, fixed on her. The air crackled with an unspoken accusation, a palpable tension. Her breath caught in her throat. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. It wasn't a question. It was a demand, an accusation. Ava's mind raced, scrambling for an explanation. She could lie, feign ignorance, but something in his gaze, a raw vulnerability she had glimpsed the night of the storm, urged her to be honest. I saw the box, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. It was beautiful. I didn't mean to intrude. Her cheeks burned with shame, with the mortification of being caught. He walked slowly into the room, his eyes never leaving hers. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the frantic pounding of her own heart. He reached out, his long fingers closing over the wooden box, his touch almost reverent. "These belong to my sister," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, tinged with an unbearable sorrow. She loved flowers, the words hung in the air, a fragile confession, a glimpse into the depths of his guarded heart. Ava felt a wave of empathy wash over her, a profound understanding of the hidden pain that shaped him. This wasn't just a boss. He was a man haunted by loss, a man who carried his grief in carefully guarded treasures. The revelation of his sister's journal, the unexpected glimpse into Mr. Kim's profound grief, had irrevocably altered the dynamic between them. The invisible wall that had separated Master and Maid now had a hairline fracture, a tiny opening through which a fragile understanding could pass. Ava found herself observing him with a new depth of empathy, seeing beyond the cold, ruthless exterior to the wounded man beneath. She noticed the way his gaze would sometimes drift to the small wooden box, a silent testament to his enduring sorrow. One crisp autumn morning, a package arrived for Ava, a heavy box filled with her old textbooks and research papers, sent by a thoughtful friend from her university days. As she unpacked them in her small, sparsely furnished room, a wave of longing washed over her. She missed her studies, the intellectual stimulation, the world of ideas that felt so distant now. A knock on her door startled her. It was Mr. Kim, a rare, almost unprecedented visit to the staff quarters. He stood in the doorway, his usual impassive expression softened by a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. His eyes fell on the scattered textbooks, then back to her face. "You're a student," he stated, his voice devoid of judgment, merely an observation. Ava clutched a worn copy of the Odyssey, its pages dog-eared and familiar. "I was. Before my mother got sick." Her voice was laced with a quiet despair, a mourning for a future that seemed to be slipping away. He stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the meager furnishings, the stark contrast to the opulence of the main house. "What were you studying?" he asked, his tone surprisingly gentle. "Literature and ancient history," she replied, a faint spark returning to her eyes as she spoke of her passion. He nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "A challenging field," he paused, then continued, his voice low, almost contemplative. "My sister, she was also passionate about history, particularly Korean dynastic history, the shared thread, a delicate connection woven through their disparate lives, hung in the air between them." Ava felt a profound sense of connection, a shared vulnerability that transcended their social divide. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, intricately carved silver key. "There's a private library on the 3rd floor. My sister's collection. It's rarely used now." He held out the key, its polished surface gleaming in the morning light. You may use it. Discreetly, of course. Ava stared at the key, then at his face, her heart thrumming with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. It was an olive branch, a silent gesture of kindness, a recognition of her worth beyond her role as a maid. It was a lifeline, a bridge back to the intellectual world she so desperately missed. "Thank you, Mr. Kim," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a fleeting glimpse of the man he might have been, had life not hardened him. The library was a sanctuary, a haven of hushed whispers and ancient wisdom. Ava spent every spare moment there, surrounded by the scent of old paper and leather, her fingers tracing the spines of countless books. Mr. Kim's sister's collection was vast and eclectic, a testament to a vibrant, curious mind. Among the historical texts and literary classics, Ava discovered a hidden compartment in one of the antique desks. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed letters and dried flowers, was a small, exquisitely crafted silver locket. It was tarnished with age, but its intricate design still shone through. As she held it, a strange sense of déjà vu washed over her, a fleeting memory of something she couldn't quite grasp. The locket felt warm in her palm, almost alive. A sudden, sharp sound from downstairs, a loud, angry voice that wasn't Mr. Kim's, shattered the peaceful quiet. Ava quickly tucked the locket into her pocket, her heart pounding. Footsteps pounded up the grand staircase, heavy and urgent. She heard Mr. Kim's voice, sharp and commanding, followed by a woman's shrill, accusatory tone. "You think you can just replace me, Hyun?" With a common maid, the words, laced with venom, pierced through the thick library doors. Ava pressed her ear against the wood, her blood running cold. "She means nothing to me, Alara," Mr. Kim retorted, his voice tight with controlled fury. "She's merely a temporary employee." The words, though meant to protect, stung Ava like a whip. A temporary employee, a common maid. It was a harsh reminder of her place, a stark contrast to the fragile intimacy they had begun to build. Alara. The name resonated with a chilling familiarity, a name whispered in hushed tones by the other maids, a ghost from Mr. Kim's past. Ava peeked through the crack in the door. A stunning woman, impeccably dressed in a scarlet gown, stood in the foyer, her eyes blazing with fury, her gaze fixed on Mr. Kim. She was beautiful, terrifying, and clearly a force to be reckoned with. "Don't lie to me, Hyun," Alara shrieked, her voice echoing through the vast space. "I know what you do. I know your secrets." Mr. Kim's face was a mask of cold fury, but Ava saw the subtle clench of his jaw, the flicker of fear in his eyes. This was not just a romantic rival. This was a dangerous threat, a woman who held power over him. The confrontation escalated, words exchanged like daggers. Ava's stomach churned with a mixture of fear and a strange, protective instinct. She felt a fierce loyalty to Mr. Kim, despite his harsh words, despite the chasm that separated them. This woman, Alara, clearly represented a dark, dangerous past that threatened to consume them all. Ava clutched the locket in her pocket, its cold metal a stark contrast to the burning intensity of the scene unfolding below. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her quiet life as a maid was over. She was now inextricably entangled in the dangerous web of Mr. Kim's world, a world of secrets, power, and betrayal. The thought was terrifying, but also, strangely, exhilarating. The storm of Alara's return raged through the mansion, leaving a trail of shattered composure and unspoken threats. Ava, retreating to the safety of the library, found herself drawn back to the locket. As she cleaned the tarnished silver, a small, almost invisible clasp gave way, revealing a miniature portrait tucked inside. It was a painting of a young woman, her eyes bright with a mischievous sparkle, a faint scar just above her left eyebrow. The face was hauntingly familiar. It was the woman from the faded photograph in Mr. Kim's library, the one he had mourned in the darkness. It was his sister. And then, a memory, sharp and sudden, pierced through Ava's mind. A childhood accident, a fall from a tree, a small, crescent-shaped scar just above her own left eyebrow. It was a mirror image. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The locket, the scar, the shared love for history, it was too much to be coincidence. Her mother, always so guarded about their past, had mentioned a distant relative, a family branch that had moved to Korea generations ago. Could it be? Could she and Mr. Kim be family? The thought was both electrifying and terrifying. If true, it would unravel everything. The class divide, the power imbalance, the unspoken tension that had simmered between them, all would be transformed. She needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to her. She found Mr. Kim in his study, his face still etched with the aftermath of Alara's visit, a single glass of amber liquid clutched in his hand. "Mr. Kim," Ava began, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "I need to ask you something." He looked up, his eyes weary, but still sharp. "What is it, Miss Ava?" She held out the locket, its silver gleaming in the lamplight. "This belonged to your sister. I found it in the desk." His gaze softened, a flicker of pain in his eyes as he recognized the heirloom. "Yes, it was hers. And this," Ava continued, her finger tracing the scar above her eyebrow. "Do you see it?" He leaned closer, his brow furrowing, his eyes widening as he recognized the familiar mark. "It's impossible, is it?" Ava pressed, her voice gaining strength. "My mother, she always spoke of a lost family connection, a branch that moved to Korea. And this locket, the scar, they're too similar." He stared at her, a whirlwind of emotions warring on his face, disbelief, shock, a dawning hope. He reached out, his hand hovering over her face, then gently touched the scar. "My sister, she had a twin, separated at birth. We were told she died." The words were a hushed admission, a revelation that shook the very foundations of their lives. Ava felt a wave of dizzying emotion, joy, confusion, a profound sense of belonging. The pieces of her fragmented past were finally clicking into place. The truth, once revealed, was a powerful, transformative force. Mr. Kim, or Hyun as Ava now knew him, stood before her, not as a distant, intimidating boss, but as a long-lost brother. The initial shock gave way to a torrent of questions, of shared memories, of a past they were both robbed of. Hyun, his voice raw with emotion, recounted the story of their family, of the tragic circumstances that led to the separation of the twins, of the decades of grief and unanswered questions. Ava, in turn, shared her own fragmented memories, the stories her mother had carefully guarded, now seen through a new, illuminating lens. The mansion, once a symbol of her servitude, now felt like a repository of their shared history, a place where their fractured family could finally begin to heal. The threat of Alara, however, still loomed large. She was not just a spurned lover. She was a dangerous adversary, privy to Hyun's business dealings, capable of exposing secrets that could dismantle his empire. "She knows about the syndicate," Hyun confessed, his face grim. "She has information that could destroy everything." Ava, no longer just a maid, but a sister, a confidant, felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. "We'll face her together," she declared, her voice firm, unwavering. "She won't win." The alliance was forged, not out of duty, but out of a newfound bond, a shared destiny. They spent days meticulously piecing together Alara's motives, her weaknesses, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Ava's sharp intellect, honed by years of academic study, proved invaluable. She found discrepancies in Alara's past financial records, uncovered hidden connections to rival factions, exposed the intricate web of deceit Alara had woven. The final confrontation was set in the grand ballroom, a stage for their ultimate showdown. Alara, resplendent in a shimmering black gown, stood poised, a venomous smile playing on her lips. "So, The maid has delusions of grandeur, she sneered, her eyes glinting with malice. And you, Hyun, have a penchant for lost causes, but Ava was no longer a shy girl. She stood tall, her gaze steady, the silver locket clutched in her hand. I am not a maid, Alara. I am Ava Kim, and you underestimate us at your peril. She laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece, exposing Alara's treachery, her lies, her attempts to sabotage Hyun's empire. Hyun, standing beside her, his presence a silent wall of support, watched as Alara's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The power shifted, irrevocably. Alara, cornered and defeated, finally broke, her accusations turning into desperate pleas. The battle was won, not with violence, but with truth, with the unwavering strength of a reunited family. In the aftermath, the mansion shed its oppressive gloom, bathed in the soft glow of a new beginning. Alara was gone, her threats neutralized, her power diminished. The syndicate, once a shadow hanging over Hyun's life, was brought to heel, its operations streamlined, its darker elements purged. Hyun, no longer a solitary figure burdened by secrets, embraced his newfound family with a warmth Ava had never thought possible. Their mother, after a long and arduous recovery, was finally home, her eyes bright with tears as she embraced her long-lost son and daughter. The reunion was cathartic, a cleansing balm for decades of unspoken grief and longing. Ava, no longer a maid, but a partner in her brother's legitimate ventures, thrived. She enrolled back in university, pursuing her studies with renewed vigor, her intellect now sharpened by the crucible of her experiences. She helped Hyun establish a foundation in their sister's name, dedicated to fostering education and preserving cultural heritage, a living testament to the dreams they had both shared. The scars of their past remained, etched into their hearts, but they were no longer symbols of pain, but of resilience, of survival, of the enduring power of love. The old mansion, once a cold fortress, transformed into a vibrant home, filled with laughter, with shared meals, with the quiet joy of a family finally whole. The once feared Mafia boss, Hyun, found redemption not in power or wealth, but in the embrace of his family, in the quiet acts of kindness, in the unwavering support of his sister. He learned to trust, to open his heart, to shed the heavy armor he had worn for so long. Ava, the shy girl who had replaced her mother as a maid, had not only surprised a Korean mafia boss but had, in doing so, uncovered a hidden legacy, redeemed a fractured family, and found her own place in a world she never knew existed. The final uplift was not just about love redeeming even the bloodstained, but about the quiet courage of a woman who dared to stand tall, to seek truth, and to forge a future where family, hope, and love reigned supreme. The century-old bottle mystery, a subtle thread woven through their family history, was finally uncorked, its contents revealing not just a rare vintage, but a parchment detailing their ancestors' courageous journey from Korea, a testament to their enduring spirit. Their story became a legend, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest corners of the world, love, family, and a dash of unexpected courage could truly shock everyone.